Why are gay men so often misdiagnosed as sex addicts? Hey guys, Michael Pizzulo here, psychotherapist in West Hollywood, working mostly with gay men. So very often these days, I encounter people who are very quick to label themselves as sex addicts. And they're almost always gay men, actually. And the reason I want to bring this up is because I feel like there's a lot of misinformation and ideas out there that are simply not true. So I want to clear some things up. So you may have heard of sex addiction. There's been a few famous celebrities like Tiger Woods and I think even James Franco who have publicly gone to treatment facilities for this type of thing. And there's a lot of controversy about the idea of, can you be addicted to sex? We typically think of an addiction in terms of a substance that can, be fatal and lead to physical withdrawals. But we've begun to apply this addiction paradigm to other things like, behaviors, food, sometimes even like shopping or video games. So we've gotten more creative in terms of how we're going to apply this addiction paradigm. And but what I've seen though is that gay men seem increasingly convinced that they may have this problem. And I actually think that most of them are mislabeling themselves. So first, just to qualify, sex addiction is technically not a recognized diagnosis in the DSM, which is the most robust, renowned diagnostic manual. Not that I particularly agree with a lot of the way they characterize things, but just so you're aware, it's technically not a recognized diagnosis. So if someone gets that label, there's some debate over whether or not it's even technically diagnostically true. I would argue that someone absolutely can have a compulsive or even an addictive relationship with sex. I do think that's true. I think the problem comes in how you identify that, because there has to be some sort of criteria that you go through. And I think what ends up happening for a lot of gay men is because our culture is often a little bit more sexually free or maybe even just sexual in general, that it's easy for us to get confused and think that we actually have something pathological going on. So if you look up, symptoms of sex addiction, you're going to see things like spending too much time thinking about sex. Well, what is too much time? Who gets to, quantify that? If you ask a bunch of different guys, how often do you think about sex? I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to even suggest that there's like a normal and abnormal amount. They also talk about, risky behaviors, which sure, there are some things that are objectively risky, but then again, getting into defining risk in terms of sexuality, I think it gets a little, confusing. Someone might say like, any sex that's not with your committed partner is risky. And a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. So just certain paradigms like that, they even talk about like, not even just thoughts about sex, but how often you're turned on. And again, like I think some of these things are things people can't necessarily control. So it's one of those things where if you can't define what's healthy and what's normal, then defining what's pathological and abnormal, I think is going to get a little bit confusing. And ultimately, I think with gay men, because we have a pretty sexual culture in terms of hookup apps and even things like bathhouses and open relationships, that it's really easy to misconstrue that as some sort of, deviant sexual behavior or sexual addiction, when it actually may be very culturally normal. And I think the problem with this is that it can really lend itself going back towards a lot of very negative, homophobic paradigms about, gay sex being wrong or being dirty or being excessive and so on and so forth. I never hear straight men complain that they're having too much sex. I never hear that. But I do hear gay men often, slut shame themselves or suggest that there's something wrong with them sexually or that they're sex addicts. So I think it's a very important distinction to make. If you're a gay man getting treatment for this, I think in general, it's really good to see a gay therapist, but especially if you are a gay man who's struggling with sex addiction, this is going to be like finding a needle in a haystack in terms of finding the right providers, because it's a really niche topic. And then there isn't actually a universal consensus in the mental health field about how to deal with this. There is no like regimented path of this is what we all do with this issue. So you're really going to want to find someone who understands gay men and then also understand sex addiction. With that being said too, there are a couple of, renowned sex addiction pioneers in the field who I do respect, like Patrick Carnes, for example, and they do have some really great workbooks, and they've been the foundation for a lot of treatment facilities, and a lot of them do employ a 12-step model of recovery. But I will say though that when you read through that literature, while a lot of it's good, I think for just sort of a structure and a baseline for someone who's struggling with sexual compulsivity, whether you're gay or straight, it is very clear that the paradigm they're working with is a very heteronormative one. It does seem to boil down to sex should ultimately be in a, loving, committed, long-term relationship, and that's what healthy is, which that definitely can be healthy, but it is a little bit limiting, and I think particularly for gay men, it might feel very limiting. A lot of the, anecdotal experiences they share in these books are straight men who have, had lots of affairs and cheated on their wives, and then they're sort of going back into their marriage and becoming monogamous, and again, which is great, no problem with that. But that model of recovery doesn't exactly fit, what most gay men might be going through. So if you are really struggling with sexual compulsivity and you're experiencing things like, it's, the addiction is taking up a lot of time, you're missing work, spending lots of money, getting diseases, like there definitely are certain markers, getting injuries through sex, there's certain markers you can definitely look at that could indicate more concretely that you have a, problem with sexual compulsivity or addiction. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not a real thing, because it definitely is. But again, making sure that you're working with providers who really get this issue and get gay men, because it's going to be a really specific intersection to find. But ultimately too, that I think that gay men are really much more likely to be pathologized in a way that is just not fair and kind of feels a little homophobic to me. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm curious. I know this is a very sort of new topic. It gets a lot of discourse, but there's not a lot of consensus about what we all agree upon when it comes to gay men, sex addiction, or both. So curious to hear what you guys think. If you like videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. And if you want to talk to me directly, get some advice, work together, I'll put a link in the description as well, and you can book a consult with me. So thanks, guys.